The rain had not stopped for 4 days, and still she walked. Clara Whitfield pressed forward with her 5 girls at her side, skirts soaked and heavy, hair plastered to her cheeks, shoes long since ruined in the sucking mud. The prairie stretched wide and gray, and the sky felt endless, a sheet of weeping iron. Each step was a prayer not spoken, each breath a vow not to collapse. Behind her came the small shuffling of her daughters, hands clasped tight to keep from drifting away in the storm. To the world, they were just shadows against the desolate plain, but to Clara, they were the whole of her heart, her reason for enduring. By the 4th morning she reached Willow Creek, the town where she had once been young and laughing, before life had burned away the ease from her face. She stood at the mercantile door, soaked through, children trembling behind her. "Bread, if you have mercy," she whispered. The shopkeeper's eyes turned cold. He drew the shutters closed. Whispers followed her down the boardwalk. That Whitfield woman, still dragging them girls, her husband drank it all away. Clara heard them as clearly as if they had been knives. Sheriff Tate Holloway passed her by, hat pulled low, never pausing, never seeing the hungry eyes of the children clinging to her skirts. A church bell tolled, but no one opened the door. Clara led her daughters on, the weight of shame pressing heavier than the rain. Beyond the town, she found no shelter but a hollow beneath a fallen oak. There they stayed, huddled together, while the sky broke itself again and again over their heads. Nights came with the sound of coughing and small cries muffled against Clara's shoulder. She tried to keep a fire, but every stick was too wet, every spark died in the wind. The girls pressed their bellies with empty hands, and Clara sang them the soft hymns of her own childhood, half prayer, half lullaby, hoping the sound of her voice would quiet the hunger. Little Hope, the youngest, stared at her through the dark and asked, "Mama, when will the sun come back?" Clara kissed her damp forehead and answered, "When we are strong enough to see it." On the 4th day a horse came down the trail, pale gray against the sodden land. The rider was a tall man, broad-shouldered, coat slick with rain. Samuel Carver had been riding alone for near a week, moving cattle, carrying silence as his only company. His face was lined by years of war and wandering, his eyes the color of smoke. He reined up at the sight of the huddled figures. 5 girls stared back, wide-eyed, too weak to rise. A woman, proud even in her ruin, stood between them and the world. Samuel should have ridden on. The West had taught him to mind his own road, to keep his heart guarded. But he found himself dismounting, mud pulling at his boots. He studied the woman's face, pale, drawn, streaked with rain and shame, and something old and human stirred inside him. "How long you been out here?" he asked quietly. "For days," Clara answered, her voice low, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Long enough." For a moment the silence deepened, broken only by the hiss of rain through the branches. Samuel took off his coat and bent, laying it over the shoulders of the smallest girl. Hope whimpered and pressed her face against the wool. That simple act, unspoken, unmeasured, was more mercy than Clara had seen in years. "You can't stay out here," Samuel said finally. His voice held no command, only truth. "My cabin's half a day's ride. There's fire and food enough." Clara stiffened. Pride rose bitter on her tongue. She had been judged and pitted too many times. She would not trade her dignity for another man's charity. "We'll manage," she whispered. Samuel studied her, saw the thin shoulders, the girl's hollow eyes. He did not press, only said, "I ain't asking you to owe me, just asking you to keep them alive." His words hung there, quiet but heavy, like a hand offered in the dark. Clara's heart wavered. She looked down at her daughters. Martha with lips cracked, Ruth coughing softly, Eliza and Jane shivering against each other, little Hope clutching the coat, as if it were salvation itself. Pride bent then, not broken, but softened by the weight of love. "Very well," she murmured, hardly trusting her own voice. Samuel nodded. Nothing more. He lifted the smallest girl into his saddle, steadied Clara as she mounted behind. The others clambered up, clinging where they could. Together, under the curtain of rain, they began the slow ride toward a cabin that waited like a lantern in the storm. Clara looked back once at the sodden hollow they were leaving, then forward into the unknown, the smallest flicker of hope warming her chest. The rain did not stop, but for the first time in 4 days, she no longer felt utterly alone. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke and damp wool. Clara stood just inside the door, unsure whether to sit or to remain on her feet. Samuel set about tending the fire without looking at her, as though he knew the weight of her hesitation. The girls were already drifting into sleep, wrapped in quilts too big for their small bodies, their faces eased by the first warmth in days. Clara lingered near them, touching their hair, her heart torn between relief and the uneasy knowledge of being under a stranger's roof. Samuel moved quietly, his every gesture shaped by years of solitude. He ladled beans into tin bowls, his hands shaking slightly, not from fear but from the strangeness of company. Clara noticed, though she said nothing. She was weary to her bones, but she watched him in silence, and the silence became its own fragile language between them. When he set the bowl before her, he did not meet her eyes. He simply said, "Eat. You'll need your strength." In town, the whispers spread like prairie fire. Abigail Turner, dressed in her finery, leaned close to the preacher's wife on Sunday morning. The Whitfield woman has thrown herself into that cowboy's arms. 5 daughters and no shame. The words carried across Willow Creek, bending ears and filling mouths, until even Sheriff Tate came riding to Samuel's door. He found Samuel mending a fence post, while Clara hung laundry to dry in the sunlight. The girls were barefoot in the grass, laughter breaking loose after too long in silence. Tate tipped his hat, but his words held no kindness. "Sam, this won't sit well with folks. A man taking in a woman like her. People talk. You'd best send him on their way." Samuel straightened slowly, his eyes shadowed under the brim of his hat. "Ain't my concern what folks say," he answered, voice steady as an oak. Tate shifted in his saddle, muttered something about decency, then turned his horse back toward town. Clara stood frozen, shame stinging her cheeks, but Samuel gave her no look of blame. He only went back to his work, leaving her with the strange gift of his quiet loyalty. Days slipped into weeks. The cabin, once silent as a tomb, now held the sound of children's laughter, of wood being split, of soup simmering over the hearth. Samuel taught the older girls how to feed the gray horse, how to carry water without spilling. Their small hands grew steadier under his patience. At night, Clara mended his torn shirts by lamplight, her fingers trembling when they brushed over patches worn by hard living. He would glance up from whittling, eyes catching hers for just a heartbeat, and then look away again. The unspoken filled the room more than any words could. But peace was a fragile thing on the frontier, and Willow Creek would not leave them be. One bitter night, lanterns bobbed through the dark, a cluster of figures coming up the muddy road. Torches flickered outside the cabin, and Abigail Turner's voice rose above the wind. "Samuel Carver, send her out. That woman is a disgrace, and you're no better for harboring her." Clara froze where she stood, gathering her daughters close. Samuel opened the door and stepped into the torchlight, his figure outlined against the warm glow behind him. Sheriff Tate was there, eyes lowered, shifting uneasily, unwilling to lead yet unwilling to stop it. Abigail's face twisted with scorn. "We won't have her stay in our town. A decent man would turn her away." Samuel's voice was calm, carrying through the night. "Then let decency be yours. Let disgrace be mine. But these children stay warm tonight." For a long moment no one spoke. The torches hissed in the drizzle, the mob shifting on their feet, shame creeping into their silence. Abigail's mouth opened, but no words came. Sheriff Tate finally tugged his brim low and muttered, "Go on home." One by one, the townsfolk drifted back into the dark, leaving the cabin standing quiet and unbroken. Clara sank to her knees, tears slipping down her face. Not for fear, but for the first time in years because someone had stood for her without demanding anything in return. Samuel did not touch her, did not speak. He simply closed the door and fed another log to the fire, as though it was the most ordinary thing in the world. When dawn came, the storm was gone. Sunlight spread across the prairie, clean and golden. The girls ran barefoot through wet grass, their laughter carrying like bells. Clara sat on the porch with a cup of coffee warm between her hands. Samuel joined her, hat pushed back, gaze soft as he watched the children. "Looks like the sun finally came back," he said, almost to himself. Clara's eyes followed her daughter's, their dresses glowing in the morning light. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Yes," she murmured, "because we were strong enough to see it." They sat side by side, no promises made, no declaration spoken, only the quiet knowledge that neither of them was alone anymore. And if you, dear listener, ever find yourself walking through rain with no shelter, remember this: storms will pass, and sometimes salvation arrives not with trumpets or glory, but in the small mercy of someone who simply refuses to look away. The West has always belonged to those who endure, but it is love, unspoken, steadfast, that keeps us strong enough to see the sun again.